Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We're most pleased to continue our discussion from last week. Our guest was Captain Wayne Longo, and we talked about the campaign and structure and functions of the Idaho State Police. He did such a good job talking about their role and their purpose. This week we want to talk about the combating crime in the state, and he will be dealing with particularly emphasis on how we combat illegal drugs in our state. Again, welcome to the program, Wayne Longo. Captain Wayne Longo, you are in charge of the 1st District here of the State Police at the time of taping this program, and it was just such a very informative program last week, and thank you for returning for this second program.
Thanks, Tony. It's my pleasure.
Let's just get into the discussion of combating crime. I know the state police and the sheriff's department of a county and the city police are all involved, and there are times when you work with federal authorities. Certainly there are crimes committed, which is both a state action and a federal crime. Let's talk about, first of all, for our state, where you're familiar with it, if you just do an overview of crime in our state, is it on the rise? Is it on the decline? And for the types of crime we have, what are our greatest challenges? What areas is it we most seriously find a rise in crime?
Well, the most recent statistics that we've seen, and Idaho is required, like all states, to provide on the Unified Crime Reporting Program to the federal government, specifically to the FBI, all the statistics supplied by city, county, and state police. So every law enforcement agency in the state of Idaho reports their statistics to the state police. We compile that together, and we forward that to the UCR. In addition to that, the state of Idaho, through the state police, puts out a publication every year called Crime in Idaho. And if you look at, you can pick up the book Crime in Idaho, and you can pick up any city from Blackfoot to Coeur d'Alene to Pocatello to Boise and everything in between. And in all the Part 1 categories crimes, which are 8 crimes, and then Part 2 category crimes, which are usually lesser felonies and serious misdemeanors, you can look at all the statistics on have they increased from the prior year, what have they been for the past 5 years and 10 years. And so you can see some trends in different areas. So to give a long answer to a question, it's very difficult to say that crime is either up or down. You almost look at it individually and jurisdictionally from each jurisdiction. Some crime in some areas go up in some counties and cities where burglary, for example, might be on a rise, but violent crime, for example, might be down. Certainly drug crimes we see a tremendous amount of. Some of the crimes, such as methamphetamine labs, for example, those types of criminal acts that we investigate, that is on a somewhat of a decline, and which is good news because there's such a dangerous investigation to perform for local and state police. And so it's really almost a situational thing on where you are and what type of crime you're looking at. To say that one area has experienced a dip in crime across the board, I don't know that exists. You'll have an ebb and flow on the different types of crime.
In your cooperation, as we talked about last week, with local law enforcement, which they have such a heavy responsibility because the crimes are happening in their counties and cities and violating laws that they have jurisdiction over. As of this time, with your real valuable experience, what areas have had the greatest call for your help in would say the last 2 or 3 years state police?
I would have to say it would be the extreme problem that the state has experienced with the growth of methamphetamine laboratories. And the state police, and again, it's not because we're better than anybody else, we have statewide authority. We had the equipment at the time this problem became extreme. We had the training, and we had the cooperation base with cities and counties. And we're also administrating the federal grant that pays for the cleanup of methamphetamine laboratories. We're considered the generators of the waste, we being law enforcement, and that would quickly bankrupt most law enforcement agencies, including the state police, if we didn't have the federal dollars. So actually we have a pretty good marriage between the federal government providing the cleanup funding and city, county, and state police actually doing the criminal investigation and the cleanup of these crime scenes. That's probably been our biggest focus is assisting those cities and counties with that effort. Cities and counties have responded to the best of their resources. We're responded to the best of our resources. And if you put all of it together in one picture, it's actually quite a response. And to some degree, we've had calls and contacts from other agencies across the nation that have looked at this cooperation between city, county, and state police and said, how are you guys doing this? And, it's very simple. We all talk. We all work together. Somebody's criminal is my criminal, and, it's all intertwined. And if we don't cooperate, the only winner is the individual that chooses to break the law. And so with this cooperation on the drug side of things and in general law enforcement as a whole, it's really made quite a organized effort to deal with these issues.
So because of this coordinated effort and your emphasis on it, you've been able to really to discover and to arrest and to at least put some of those individuals involved out of the business.
Yes.
How do you feel about another thing Idaho's been really emphasizing, and certainly here in Northern Idaho, are the drug courts?
Drug courts are a necessary part of the component if we're going to, as a society, deal with the bigger issue of why people abuse substances. The methamphetamine problem in particular is a problem that law enforcement cannot solve by themselves. This is a problem that we can't incarcerate our way out of. We can't build enough jail cells to house the people that are addicted to methamphetamine. On the other hand, you're dealing with even simple possession of methamphetamine is a felony, so we're dealing with a serious crime. And a few years ago, the first judicial district here in Coeur d'Alene, Judge Morano was very instrumental in doing this, organized drug court, and it was modeled after programs that were started in other portions of the country and in Ada County. And it is an absolutely essential piece of the puzzle in dealing with the bigger global issue of substance abuse. And, in our strategy on the city, county, and state police side is we continue our enforcement efforts. We've expanded our community policing efforts with block watches, public safety presentations. We routinely we will talk to any group, any group of citizens, service groups, things like that, in cooperation with local law enforcement to bring the message about what can the public do to protect their neighborhoods. And it's, we do it in the sense of we're a partnership. It's not just law enforcement coming in and saying, we can't do it all, it's up to you guys, and then we turn around and leave. We provide some suggestions, and then the discussion on this is what we do, these are the constraints that we have under the United States Constitution. Those are very applicable and necessary constraints that law enforcement needs to have, and those rights protect all of us. And when the public understands the constraints that we have in order to keep everybody's civil rights protected, then they understand that this isn't like TV, where in 45 minutes or less, not counting commercials, you can go in and make an arrest and be done with a situation and move on to the next one. Some of these things require a lot of time. Once given that information, the public is very understanding of what the city PDs and the county sheriff's departments and the state police are up against. And so that has been actually a very good change over the past few years with law enforcement getting involved with our communities, because we all live here. I'm a police officer here, but I've lived here for 25 years. And I tell people, I look at this from a professional side, but I also look at it from a personal side. My children have grown up here. My wife works here. She was born and raised here. And I'm not going to leave here, so this is my home. So I have a stake in it, not just as a cop, but as a person. And so I look at it, I'm also doing this to better the environment that I'm going to live in.
I just have to add this footnote. I know your family, what a wonderful family.
Oh, thank you.
You and your wife have done a great job. I've
Thank
had the privilege of knowing your family and also your in-laws. In relation to this, I know that one of the areas that you worked in during your 25 years is really you have a real expertise in dealing with the combating of drugs. Let's just talk a little bit more. We've talked at this point about meth. That's a great problem. Would you just take some time to talk about the different categories of particularly hard drugs and what that does to humans, how it affects them mentally and physically? And secondly, I know that from studies I've seen that when people are addicted to certain drugs, they will commit crimes and desperate to get money that they would not have committed if they had not been on the drugs.
Absolutely. That is definitely a cycle that has been not changed significantly over the years. We see property crime in particular, and unfortunately over the past few years, violent crime tied very directly, especially to methamphetamine. Some of the other drugs that we see, of course, marijuana is still very prevalent, and a change that we've seen with marijuana over the years, the active ingredient, the mind-altering substance, if you will, in marijuana, and there's over 440 different chemicals in a cannabis plant. But the active ingredient that causes the hallucinations and the effect that people achieve from the drug is THC, or delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. We've seen the purity level of that rise from, in the 1980s, from 2 to 3% on the street level to in teens, 15, 16, 17%. I think medical science is still wrestling and dealing with what does that mean. Maybe it means nothing, or maybe it means something in the terms of what harm might it cause to somebody. There's differing sides and opinions on is it a gateway drug?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you.
And does it lead to other things? Yeah. And it could, with some people certainly. But I think the bigger picture is the abuse of illegal drugs leads to associations with other people maybe that will use other drugs. And
so it makes that connection.
It makes a connection there. And, and without getting into the more, I guess, the bigger view of society and personalities and why people use drugs, but that's a drug that we still continue to see. Cocaine has kind of ebbed and flowed. We've seen with the steady increase of methamphetamine over the past few years, unfortunately, that as it's increased, we've seen cocaine drop off, and they're both very powerful central nervous system stimulants. The unfortunate part of this is with the increased use of methamphetamine, along with that increased use comes the manufacturing of methamphetamine. So we have the potential, or the very real dangers of the laboratories that this drug is produced in. And where with cocaine, that came into our area, even though it's a dangerous drug, it wasn't manufactured here. But with methamphetamine, we now have the collateral damage of the drug being manufactured here as well.
So it's an extra challenge. If I understand what I've read about and talked to some police, is that to create the meth drug, you can do that with the ingredients are available, and you can do it at a local place. And
sure.
Although it's very, very dangerous in the explosion. So that's added to your challenge?
Absolutely. The ingredients that can be used to manufacture methamphetamine, every one of the ingredients can be purchased over the counter in hardware stores, grocery stores, department stores, things like that carry paints and those types of things. So it makes it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to regulate those types of chemicals. And
so the volume of production can be so much greater than the drugs have to be imported in.
Exactly, and it gives somebody the ability to, if you can make it yourself, why would you deal with a criminal gang and all the violence that's associated with that? And and just to remind people, if you look at the violence just a few weeks ago over in Spokane, at a 14-year-old boy, he's alleged to, he's not been proven guilty yet, alleged to have shot and killed an individual over a drug deal. And that's just 30 miles away. We have violence here. And so those things are not things that we think about only in big cities. And that's a challenge that local law enforcement and the state police wrestle with. We have a continuing onslaught of these types of issues to deal with, society ills, if you will, that we have to contend with. And so many people become addicted to this drug methamphetamine that started out as being very good people. They had very good careers, very good lives, they were family people, and this drug takes such a hold on them that very quickly evaporates away as far as being of any value to them. So you also see an eroding of a family situation, which is tough to see. That's where programs like Judge Moreno's Drug Court come in and hopefully return somebody to being a good family person, a good member of society, going to school, going to work, or what have you. But methamphetamine by far is our biggest drug issue that we're contending with. Are we winning the war with it? Or I hate to use the word war, because war always means that there's a definite beginning and there's a definite end in sight. And one of the worst things I think we did as a society is say, let's declare war on drugs. And this is a problem that has been around for generation after generation after generation, drug abuse. We can't point to any generation at all and say it's their fault or that started with this group. And as a flip side of that, if we're going to have success with this, we have to be patient, which typically as a society we're not, and allow generation after generation of these programs like DARE and Drug Court and substance abuse counseling and increased enforcement to get to a point where maybe we do win. And that's, I think, where we're at. I think we're probably past the midpoint, maybe further than that, but we still have a ways to go.
In addition to what you've talked about concerning meth and cocaine, what are some of the other drugs that are just so destructive and that are maybe to a lesser extent, but are a problem in Idaho?
To a lesser extent, and again, this ebbs and flows. We do see LSD occasionally. Very powerful hallucinogen, and typically we see that marketed more towards our young people. A drug that unfortunately we're starting to see creep into our schools is a drug called ecstasy. A street name is called ecstasy. It's actually MDMA. It's methylene dioxide methamphetamine, and it's a very powerful hallucinogen, basically married to methamphetamine. So you have the effects of a hallucinogen with a very powerful, unpredictable central nervous system stimulant. And that is marketed almost entirely to our young people. And that's a concern. The pills will have logos stamped on them or designs from whatever music group or rock group or signs of the zodiac, astrology, things like that, that appeal to people in their teens, or younger age groups, like in their 20s. And it's almost like a group just targeting a specific group of people because they feel they're going to be vulnerable or maybe naive enough to buy into these things. And so that's a concern. And that's also a tough group for us in the law enforcement profession to interact with. And that's been more of our fault because we haven't done it very well, but we're changing that. More and more police departments and sheriff's departments have SROs in the middle schools and the high schools, and I applaud them for that. That's an outstanding effort on local law enforcement to interact with young people. At the ISP level, state police level, we're doing more and more public safety presentations on alcohol abuse, seatbelt use, and things like that in the school. So it's a partnership, again, with the local law enforcement, not just on the enforcement end, but also on the education end. But those are probably the biggest drugs that we see. Every once in a while we see heroin creep into the area, but it's not what I would call a problem that causes most of society in Idaho a big issue. If I had to point to one drug that said this is a drug that causes most of the ills that law enforcement deals with and society has to wrestle with, it's methamphetamine.
So if you look across the United States, and certainly you have connections with other law enforcement and have conferences, so in different communities or regions of the country, it would be different types of drugs. There'd be communities where cocaine would be the greatest problem. It depends on where you are.
It really does.
In relation to, and we have the stiffest laws, which I would certainly say makes all kind of sense. Our stiffest laws are against those who traffic in the drugs,
Exactly.
that is the dealers themselves.
Exactly.
And one of the hideous things that they do is that they, from what I've read and talked to law enforcement, is that they will even sometimes give drugs free till they get people hooked up on them, and then they really charge them a price. And then those individuals are not only addicts, but they have to go out and find the money to do that. So it's just a hideous organization. How serious is it that of those kind of dealers and groups that bring drugs into Idaho?
We see both ends. We see traffickers, organized traffickers, bringing in large amounts of drugs into our area. And unfortunately, the scourge of the methamphetamine labs has so consumed law enforcement's attention, necessarily so, because they're so dangerous, that at times we're just reacting to the labs. We're not having time to be very proactive in going after these bigger traffickers. Yeah. So we have we don't have a finite limit or area of resources. We have a limited amount of resources both at the city, county, and state level, and the public has to be protected from the immediate threat, which tends to be a methamphetamine lab in a neighborhood, in a duplex, in an apartment building or something like that. And so that's where we put our focus. As we have time, all three entities, we will work proactively these other cases. And, we're trying to get, hopefully, the number of labs reduced, and we're starting to get there. And I've seen a steady trend over the past several months where both the city task force and counties and the state police were becoming more proactive in going after some of these trafficking groups than we have been, say, in the past 2 years, which is a good sign for us because then we can get back to business as usual and go after those folks because we're seeing a reduction in the labs.
There's never enough time on a program with someone like you. You're so a specialist and informed. I want to talk about something else that can be used to combat certain kinds of crime, violent crimes in particular, and that is this tremendous breakthrough I know way back in history, the fingerprints, of course, became a big
breakthrough.
breakthrough, but now is the DNA.
DNA, absolutely.
Share with us how much that's certainly not only helping to solve crime, but also proves some people innocent.
Absolutely. We've seen some tremendous breakthroughs in the technology. It's like anything else, as scientists and technology increases and advances, you see the opportunities just explode. And we're in the area with DNA, almost similar to when computers first started, and you look at the first computers just a few years ago, and you look how much more powerful they are now. And with DNA, we're made such leaps and bounds nationwide with the ability to use this technology, and it's still extremely costly, but we're reaching out, we're solving crime, and as you pointed out also, we're looking back historically. We as a society, different groups, law enforcement, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and looking at people that maybe have been wrongfully accused or incarcerated in some cases, and those people becoming exonerated because of this technology, which to me is an absolute, just a vindication of science expanding to where it's a protection for society, not necessarily just let's put somebody in jail. It's a protection. But we have solved some good crimes over the years, even in Idaho, because of this technology, specifically unfortunately, with violent crime, homicide, sexual assault cases, those types of things. So it's been a great advance.
Yeah, I just think it's so positive, because if you can do two things at the same time, if you can use that data to find the guilty party at the same time as someone's innocent to clear them, you're having the best of both worlds.
Absolutely.
Another thing on DNA that I just like to get your reaction to, and one of the awful crimes is rape, and that's been a great problem all over the country. And I was hoping that DNA was helping, anything that you can do that combats and prevents crime in the first place. I would hope that the fact that some people that would even consider that, which is unthought of, that they would even consider it, but knowing that if they do engage in that crime, that they're leaving evidence, that they're definitely leaving evidence, and that they may be much easier to find. Do you have any evidence through the DNA as it's advancing that it may be preventing some crimes from taking place?
I don't know that it really is. What it does, it's specifically when you have crimes, unfortunately, where people have degenerated or progressed to the point in their mindset where they're going to harm somebody in such a way. I don't know that there's really anything other than have a policeman standing in front of them that will stop them from committing the crime. The good part of that type of a situation is that as evidence is located, the technology exists now that perhaps even just a few years ago the evidence wasn't compelling enough to rise to the level of beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
Now it is. So the good news is, again, that somebody may be going uncharged 2 or 3 years ago is now charged rightfully and then found guilty and sentenced to prison, as they should be, because of this new technology. I wish we did have something that would stop people from hurting other people.
One of the problems in the criminal justice system is it's dangerous to assume that all people think alike, and people who are very law-abiding and healthy don't think like people who are engaging in crime. But there is another point here that I think is significant. That is, with this new technology, if you can find and convict someone who's truly guilty of a certain crime and they're sent to prison, then they're not there to commit other crimes. That is,
exactly, that
could help with the crime rate, because they're still rapists as they are murderers and so forth in that process. Again, time is fleeting by, but I would like to talk to you a minute too about some of the programs that are in place. You've alluded to those already, but concerning how can we use the educational component to try to convince people that, particularly at a young age, that what the dire consequences are of using drugs. In other words, if you can use this time we have left to talk to young people about what it can do to them mentally and physically. And I assume from what I've read that after a certain amount of use of drugs, they never could get back to where they were before they used those.
Some drugs are definitely, especially methamphetamine. The message I like to bring to people, Tony, is life is about choices. We choose to do a lot of things, and the beauty of this country is we have the freedom of choice. and that should be extended when somebody is considering using a drug. And certainly it's your own body, you can make up your own decision, and what I ask people to do is make a balanced decision, make an informed decision. Don't just listen to what somebody says or what the peer pressure says about a drug. And certainly if you just listen to what somebody says about methamphetamine and they describe the high of the methamphetamine, it's going to convince somebody to use the drug. But if you look beyond that and say, what are the consequences of using the drug? If I take it one time, do I have a problem? Or if I take it 100 times, I don't have a problem, but on the 101st time, I have a severe problem with it to the point where it affects my life physically and mentally for the rest of my life. If you're a young person, you're looking at a very dire existence for the rest of your life because you chose to take this short-term high. We do know that drugs like methamphetamine, after a short period of time, and I don't know how long the time is, the high no longer exists. People take it to keep from being ill. That should be a concern to them.
So after a certain time, they can take it, but they don't get that high anymore.
They don't get high anymore. They're just maintaining. They're just trying to exist in life. I would challenge them to look at people that have used this drug over a medium to long period of time and tell me what you see, or tell yourself what you see. And I can guarantee you, you look at a person that has changed drastically, their moods have changed, they no longer have a job, they're out of school.
Some of them are homeless.
Some are homeless, some have absolutely nothing to resort to other than crime. And if that's the existence, and I'm not saying that everybody that uses this drug will wind up that way, but if the chances are better than even that it will, why would you take that chance with your life? You're given one life, and unfortunately, if you make a decision that affects you for the rest of your life, it can be a bad decision. And there's no turning back. We see this drug commit permanent damage to people. And it is so sad. I've been in search warrants, and I know we're running out of time, where I look at photos of people taken just 6 months ago, and I'm looking at the person sitting across from me, and you would never recognize them.
And there's things like LSD where it can reoccur at another time.
Yeah, they have flashbacks.
On that, I have to bring our permanent conclusion. Captain Wayne Longo, you've been very, very informative and helpful this 2 weeks, and I want to thank you and the Idaho State Police for sharing this information with us. It's so valuable to our viewers. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, Tony.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know you found the two programs very, very informative over the past 2 weeks with Captain Wayne Longo, of the captain with the Idaho State Police and in charge of the police in the 5 northern counties in in 1st District of the State Police. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week, and we'll turn yet to another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.